Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hi, Nikki. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thank you so much for taking your time out for being a part of this show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. Nikki, before we get into the business aspect of no anxiety test prep, right? If you could walk us through your journey up until the point where you started, because you started off as a journalist and then you switched over to teaching students for SAT. So what led to the transition?
It's funny, I started college as a special education major, realized it wasn't for me, switched to journalism, was doing quite well at it. And then when I graduated, promptly switched back to education, which makes no sense. I was working in a school that I was not happy with. And a friend suggested I start tutoring for a big company as a side job because I made no money. And that side job turned into a full time job where I was writing curriculum, tutoring, teaching, hiring, managing, and I just really loved it. And I'm very grateful to that company. I think they do a lot of things well. I think one thing they didn't do super well was personalization. And I felt that that was an area that I could do better, have some more flexibility, to an extent, some more irreverence. And after about 5 years with them, I started No Anxiety Prep. So my name is Nicole Andrea Porcaro. So I'm the NAP in NAP.
Okay, got it, Nicole. Okay. But I'm gonna call you Nikki, right? That's totally cool. Okay, uh, Nikki, how how now again? There's one transition that we spoke about from what you were doing and then how you got into teaching. But here you were in that company that you worked for, where you taught, you built curriculum, hiring, and all those things, and then there's one aspect where you saw things went working really well, which was personalization, and then that's where you decide to probably start things on your own to bridge that gap of personalization, right? But there's a huge difference between having a steady flow of income versus when you have to start off everything on your own. How did you manage that straight away? Did you plan for it upfront, or how much time did you take, and how did you go about bridging the gap from getting something steady to doing that on your own?
So as most companies of that size that I came from have had a non-compete, and I not only is that a legal thing, it's an ethical thing. So what
Yeah.
I actually kind of started doing was the college counseling aspect, the helping students with essays and college counseling, which was not a service that was offered through my company, so that didn't violate the non-compete. And as I, sort of built that up, as I, left the company and my non-compete expired, families who had been with me, who had siblings or things like that, came to me very organically, which was really nice. A place that I worked very heavily in, although I'm not Jewish, is the Orthodox Jewish community. And that's both a very big and a very small community. And their families usually have, a large number of children, and it's, they talk. So that was a really big part of me building that client base. And that's essentially how I did it while I'm not running afoul ethically, legally, and just kind of building it up.
Okay. And when you say this company that you work for didn't offer personalization, could you give us some examples of what exactly you mean by that, and how differently you did?
Sure. So it's a very well-known company worldwide, and they do a lot of classes as well as one-on-one tutoring, but they're known for their classes. And, I would teach them, and it would be really hard when you had students in the same class, which are often quite large, 20 kids sometimes. You had kids baselining on an SAT at 900, and then you also had kids coming in with 1350s, the SATs out of 1600. So you really had to teach different levels in the same class. It's almost like in the 1800s when they had the big schoolhouse and it was like grades K through 8 and you had to teach everybody. So I think that was really hard, and not everybody could afford the one-on-one tutoring through that company. So it was difficult there. And then of course when you're with a corporation, you have to work within the strictures of the rules, even if you think sometimes that those rules are very, very stupid. So, it's bureaucracy, right? And
Yeah.
I have always had issues with authority. So I knew that, I wanted to do it a little better. So when I left, I certainly again took things that I had learned about best practices in educational pedagogy, but I created strategies to me that had a slight more bit of flexibility, but also accounted for the proven research. I was able to do more flexibly timed sessions. So for instance, when I was there, it was a 2-hour tutoring session per student, which, didn't work for a lot of our students, especially if they had learning differences or scheduling or whatever. We also, really were at the forefront of online tutoring. So I always say we were not pandemic reactive. We've been doing that for over a decade. And that allowed us a ton of flexibility where if people wanted shorter sessions or group sessions with a student across the country, we could do that. And I was also a little bit more flexible with our tutors, not on qualifications, of course, but in terms of giving them a little bit more of their own style while still adhering to the no anxiety prep strategies.
Got it. Nikki, you said you worked for 5 years. Is that correct?
At that
And yeah, before you ventured on your own. Out of the 5 years, which how many years did it take for you to realize that okay, there is something? There are some gaps that can be filled. There are some things that are not met by this company, and you could probably do that on your own. So when did you realize that, and how long did it take for you to plan and start your own thing?
I would say, maybe about 3 years in, and that's when I had really found my footing. I actually won the 2009 Elite Tutor of the Year award nationally through this company, and I started to realize that, I was really good at what I did. And I would say that's when I started taking on the increased responsibility. But it was a time when people had sort of stopped calling for that company and started calling specifically for me. And I started to realize that I maybe had something special here. So I would say, from planting the seed to actually sketching out the business plan and going forth, it was probably about a year and a half.
Got it. And so it's been about year and a half since you started no anxiety test prep.
Oh no, so it's been 11 years, but when I was at the other company, it took me about if it was year 3-ish where I started it and I was there for 5 years, it took me about a year and a half to get it off the ground, but we actually just celebrated our 11th year this year.
Oh wow, congratulations on that. uh, so you said at one point you realized that people were asking for you specifically. So for, let's say, for people who are aspiring, who are already working with companies like that, and who are aspiring to go on their own for whatever reason it might be, what is, there must be teachers who don't get asked for, right? They just come, the students don't matter who's the teacher, and then there are instances where the students ask for a specific teacher. What is the difference between these two teachers, would you say?
My answer is not always going to be popular, but I think the true difference is a teacher who speaks to the student, will meets them on their level. So I work primarily with teenagers, so 14 and up into adulthood. And, sometimes I'll say the word shit in a session because that's what teenagers say. And I'll talk to them and listen to them. I half my sessions seem to be therapy sessions rather than tutoring. And I think you have to straddle that line between showing
Mm,
them you're an ally but still maintaining that figure of authority. So when I started, I was only about when I started at the big company, I was only a few years older than my students. When I started my company, I was probably about like 7, and I actually look fairly young for my age. So that certainly helped in a sense because the students could relate. I think sometimes it was a little harder, especially as a female and a young looking one, of that to be taken seriously. But I think ultimately teachers need to mix being irreverent, they need to mix being dynamic and engaging, and they have to meet a student where they are, again, within reason. You can tell when a student is having a day in which learning, advanced topics isn't, it's just not going to happen today. So you need to be able to pivot that preparation and be able to meet them where they're at and still make a session productive. But, understand that some days things aren't going to go as planned.
got it. And would you say the popularity, or for whatever you were known for, amongst the student community, that helped you get your first students when you started off No Anxiety Test Prep?
Yeah, I think again I had that sort of in the Jewish community. I had a lot of good word of mouth from my previous job, but I think once parents saw, the dynamic and engaging manner with which I built the company, they would call me. I've had calls that said, Nikki, can you get on the phone with so and so? He says you're the only one that he'll talk to right now. Or, so and so said that you're a real role model, and she really respects you for kind of being a badass female. So I think confidence, of course, is something we always all work on. There's days where I feel like that badass, and there's days where, I think we all have that imposter syndrome. But I think that was huge. And then I'm also, I really do believe this. I'm a type A, and what that means is we're always on time, which means 5 minutes early. We take copious notes. We do what we say. When people call No Anxiety Prep, for the most part, they're going to get me directly. They get to talk directly to the president. There's no press one. There's no hold for so-and-so. There's none of that. And I think people appreciate that directness, that punctuality, and that respect for their time.
Got it. Nikki, from what you've said, right, a couple of things. I was wondering, the name No Anxiety Test Prep. I was going to get to it, but then starting, it probably, came across like No Anxiety Test Prep, where you say that, you don't have to worry, test prep. But then you just made a point about saying you just have to let the students know that you're their ally. And then after you said that, now the way No Anxiety Test Prep comes across is a little different to me. So I think you've probably come across students, who've been anxious when it comes to tests. I've heard trainers say that, students brilliant, but just when they have to start talking about tests, they get anxious. So how much of this played a role in you naming it No Anxiety Test Prep?
Definitely a lot, aside from the fun initial wordplay, because old journalism habits die hard. I think we do see a lot of students who have, built up this test in their minds. And again, that was a little different pre-pandemic, but I wanted to show students that if we use an ethos to conquer this, we can make this less anxious. And that ethos that we have is called PrEP, PREP, and that stands for preparation, relatability, expertise, and positivity. And we believe that if we can use those tenets with our students, show them that these tests are conquerable, right? That they also do provide real world skills. I know it's very popular to bash the tests, and I'm not saying they're perfect, but they do, we show the students the real world skills. So by kind of focusing on that, we want to organically reduce their anxiety by building their confidence.
Got it. And when you said, you had to teach a class of 20, where, the IQ of students would range between, 800 to a 1350 or even more. How did you manage to relate to all of them at the same level? Did you even do that, or was it always a struggle, which is what led you to starting your own thing?
It wasn't easy because you have sometimes the higher level kids getting bored and the lower level kids feeling stupid. And then you kind of have the middle kids who are, typical middle child syndrome getting a little lost. So I definitely tried to level things out. Sometimes we would work in groups and I would give, the lower group maybe some easier problems, middle, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not always the hugest fan of having the higher kids work with the lower kids. I know that's a popular teaching strategy. I don't think it's really fair to the higher kids for the most part. It's something I'll try here and there. So yes, I would try to do what we call differentiated instruction, but it's very challenging, especially with a high number of students, and it's more prep time. Any teachers listening, prep time is the unsexy beast that none of us really talk about and don't really get paid for, but it is exactly how we do what we do.
Nikki, you said, you come across badass, but then, you have your moments of the imposter syndrome and stuff like that. Can you walk us through, a couple of moments where you probably felt very not in there, and how did you deal with that to come out the other side?
When I first started, I like I said, I had a few people question, whether it was my youth or my gender or things like that. I had have had some pretty big time clients. No Anxiety Prep has worked with sports team owners, diplomats, children, you know, things, scions of business in the country, things like that. So I would have to remind myself that I was the expert in what I was doing, and that they may own the blankety blank, team or this, but I was the expert. And I think the biggest thing I can offer is preparation. You walk into a meeting unprepared, and no matter what profession you're in, you get that pit, and things are just going to go off the rails. So I think being prepared and making sure that you're the expert in your subject reduces that imposter syndrome. And you have to sort of, sometimes, it sounds, I don't mean it to sound arrogant, but sometimes I have to go through my resume and go through all of the things I've accomplished and be like, oh yeah, not many people have done this, and kind of give yourself that pep talk.
Self pep talk, yeah. And 5 years you worked for this big company, and then you're at a point where you're taking home a certain amount of money. Did you start off? Did you start off making that amount of money the first month with no anxiety test prep?
I wouldn't say the first month. I will say that since the beginning, all 11 years, we have turned a six-figure profit, which is pretty impressive for any business, but especially a female-owned startup. So yes, every year it has gone well. People did flock to us. Now, again, we certainly started at a price point that was competitive, quite competitive for the time, which is kind of how I believe businesses, depending on the field, should start. But yes, we have been profitable. We also, of course, give a lot of that back to charity and initiatives and things of that nature. But yes, the money was a reason I left the company. I had pointed out the numbers again, as I mentioned, of people calling for me, and I was able to negotiate a bit of a raise in about year 4. But in year 5, they said, we can't budge, and I said, okay, well, thanks so much for what you've given me, but I think it's time to move on.
Great. Nikki, you just said especially female-run company, right? Now, I'll tell you something. I'm based in India, and in India, it's still a thing for women to start something on their own and, do it successfully. It's still a challenge in a lot of ways for the women here. And then the way they look at the West, the way they look at the US, it just sometimes they draw inspiration from there, thinking that, it's very different there. But then when you mentioned that, especially female, it comes across maybe you still have your challenges and stuff like that. What are those? Do you still face those challenges being a female-led company? If you do, what are those challenges and how did you overcome them?
I think there's always going to be a subset of the population anywhere that doesn't have feminist views. And again, I define feminist as someone who believes in equality of genders. So I'm kind of tired of being like calling people feminist. To me, the default should be that you're a feminist, and I need to know if you're not. But I'll tell you one
Yeah.
story, I guess, about it. Again, as a young female, there's always, people made jokes about, oh, you're the hot teacher, your boys are gonna like you. And I get so angry at that. Aside from being disgusting, as female teachers know, one allegation of that, true or not, is enough to ruin you. So I'll say one story. I worked with a family very long term. It was a very nasty custody battle between the parents, and the mom was suing the dad in court for basically money. The dad was paying for the tutoring, and the mom didn't want to pay for it. And I was called to testify and explain, the lesson reports and what we were doing and how it improved their grades. And the mother's lawyer on cross accused me of sleeping with the dad. And this was our plan to funnel her money through my company because we were lovers. The dad was a 58-year-old Orthodox Jewish man, and I was a 26-year-old atheist. So that pairing was not safe to say a thing. But it was very jarring for me. It was very insulting, and it was very awkward to have a sexual component brought into that just by virtue of being a female. It's pretty clear that a male tutor would not have been accused of that. So, there's always that aspect of it. I think, I've met people at events, and something I'm asked a lot, which I'm curious if men are, but it's, well, do you have a partner? Do you have a partner in the business? Nope, it's just me. Really? Yep. So I think, I'm curious if men have been asked that, but it's definitely something that's gotten better. I don't see it overtly every day, but I do know even in the beginning, I had, I can think of one family in particular who really took advantage of me in terms of rates. I was sort of promised a lot of things if I lowered the rate, and promised this and promised that about growing the business. And then when I called in that favor to cash in and say, okay, well, I got your kid into Harvard, which is true. I'm here for you to help me. We never said that. we never told you that. So they really played to me my youth in an experience, against me. And I'll never forget that family. That family actually ended up reaching out again 7 years later for more help. And I said, sorry, we're booked.
Wow. Okay. Okay, cool. Nikki, whatever you said, here's a thought, right? I mean, have you ever thought, okay, so be it. But have you thought, whatever it is that people claim that, I'm whatever, have you felt like, what, I'm going to use it to my advantage. So what? You're not really doing anything that they accuse you of or whatever it is. But have you ever felt, yeah, man, I mean, me or anybody else, if they have certain things to their advantage, why not use it to, use it in a positive way?
Absolutely. I do think there's certainly benefits to being, a younger looking person, female, whatever you want to call it. I've had numerous parents come to us and privately say, you and your staff being so young is really helpful. Obviously, that's ageist, and I will never, advertise that as something we're looking for in our tutors. We want, quality people, of course. So I don't so much care about age as how you act, but it has been a really big thing for us, for our students, to show them that our youth, our energy, our vitality is a major part of tutoring. I always say, I don't care if you're the smartest person in the world with 10 fives on your APs and an IQ of 150. If you can't relate to a teenager, I got nothing for you. So I think using many might call youthful characteristics in a positive way has helped us be very successful.
Great. Nikki, you said the company that you worked with, you were teaching, in classes of 20 students or a little more, a little less. So when you started no anxiety test prep, you said personalization was one of the important things. So did you directly start off one-to-one tutoring, or did you also do group classes?
We started off one to one. That was really what the demand was for. We, had quite a few sets of twins and triplets, so you could call that a small group, I suppose.
Mm,
I would say we started running classes a few years in due to price point. We wanted to try to, have more people have access to our courses. So we still don't really do a ton of classes, maybe a few a year, just because we're not quite seeing the demand, though we would like to expand that. But mostly it's one-to-one or small group tutoring we found is our bread and butter.
got it. Nikki, you said 11 years. You just celebrated 11 years of no anxiety test prep. And then, this 11 years, obviously, it's got that middle thing of the pandemic period, right? That kind of changed it pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic. I'm assuming when you were working for this company, it was classroom training. And then when you started, did you transit totally into online, or were you still doing face-to-face, in-person teaching?
So yeah, with my old company, I actually did both. I did teach online classes, and that, I mean, sometimes we had over 100 in an online class, which was crazy. And
Wow.
yeah, once the pandemic hit, so I would say before the pandemic, we were probably about 70% in person, 30% online. When the pandemic hit, obviously we moved that to 100% online. And I'm just such a huge fan of online tutoring for so many things, for what we do, which is, academically based, test prep based, college applications, resumes. It's easier online. I always tell people that, if I were to come to your house, I'm bringing my computer anyway. So we're going to sit there, probably 6 feet apart when things were still bad. And we're going to look at our computers. We can do that face to face here. I guess the example I would use is, yeah, if you're in med school and, you need to dissect a cadaver, yeah, I'd like to see you in person. But if we're doing math problems, or we're doing something where, a whiteboard can be popped up, or we all have the same books and equipment, I think online tutoring has greatly, increased flexibility, access. We're able to charge less for it. So I'm a huge proponent of it.
Got it. Interesting you say that, because a lot of teachers say that they don't enjoy the kind of engagement that they did when they were doing in-person classes, right? So how have you dealt with that?
Well, I live in Washington, D.C., so anybody who has lived here or been here can tell you that avoiding Washington, D.C. traffic is, that's going to basically wash away any reservations you have about doing online tutoring. So
Right.
I joke, but the stress level I would feel in having to get places honestly would affect me really, really strongly, and the
Right.
time lost. So to me, again, engagement is how you use your tools. We've got online whiteboards, we've got screen shares for materials, we've got videos that we can watch together, we've got Google Slides. So I think it's really how you use it. It's certainly harder with a class at times because you're doing more management and making sure everyone's engaged. There's certainly a large part of academic maturity and responsibility that comes with, I can't babysit you. That's not my job, especially with the age group that we work with. But I
Right.
think, the ability to, again, not deal with the time and cost and stress of traffic, the ability to work from home, to be with my doggos, any dog lovers out there, and the ability to just have all of my materials with me. I mean, I was lugging that from house to house, trunk of my car to this to that. I can eat better, right? I don't have to stop for fast food between my sessions, like little things you don't think about. I just think when you're good at online tutoring, and it does take training, everybody and their mom's calling themselves a tutor these days on, certain websites, which I have a real problem with. But I think once you've mastered the techniques and the pedagogy, it's a fantastic tool.
Great. You said everybody call themselves an online tutor, which you have a problem with. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
I can. I think, we have these websites, I don't want to mention them by name, but there's certain
Yeah.
websites that, offer find a tutor, match with a tutor. I've been guilty. And when I've needed a tutor last minute for a subject that we didn't do, I've reached out to people on that website and I've had largely not great luck. And there's a few reasons for that. Again, like I'm trying to think of a good example. Like I know a lot of things about wine, but I'm not going to necessarily say I can tutor a sommelier. Just because you know something doesn't mean you can teach it. And then it goes back to all of those intangible skills before too is, do you know how to write lesson reports? Do you know how to plan curriculum? Do you know how to pivot on the fly? Do you know how to communicate with parents and students? So I just think that when you're looking for a tutor or an educational professional, part of it is about degrees and credentials. Yes, and I have many. Part of it is about experience. Part of it is about fit, but you want to make sure that your tutor isn't just someone who is smart. They have to have that engagement and best practices. So it's certainly one of those things where you get what you pay for. I believe that. And I'm a couponer. I'll be that girl that goes to CVS, slam my coupons down like a poker hand, and walk out with all my stuff for 25 cents. I'm all about saving money. I don't think this is the place that I would advise people to do that.
Great. Uh, this would not only, help people identify the right teachers, but, the aspiring teachers, if they're wondering what's going to make them go to that professional level, I think this particular piece that you just said, maybe they could, take it as a critical feedback and maybe work on that. So that's the reason I asked you this question. Nikki, you said before the pandemic, it was 70-30, right? 70%. So sorry, when you worked with this company, it was 70% in-person classes and then 30% online classes. But then after pandemic, what has that shift been like? Is it 100% online classes?
I would say right now it's about 95 online, 5 in
Right.
person. And, I'll be honest, most of my tutors don't want to go back. They don't want to go back to the driving and the stress and the nonsense and, the masks. And, a lot of our tutors work in schools or have other jobs. We don't want to be a vector and bring that into people's homes. A lot of people have young children, and I'm sorry, but young children are germ vectors. We don't want to get sick. So we have found that people have
Yeah.
really, it's kind of one of the only good things that came from the pandemic was finally people saw my speech about online tutoring being awesome. So I think that was definitely a positive. But, we've also even had, parents be wary. And I'm like, you know what? Try one session online. And if you still hate it, then let's talk. And, without fail, everyone's like, oh, this is fine.
Great. And talking about the online infrastructure that you need for a student to get a complete experience of this tutoring, right? What are the tools that No Anxiety Test Prep use?
So we try to keep it simple but valuable. So we tend to use Zoom. Some of our tutors prefer Google Meet, which again, not the hill I'm going to die on. We used to do FaceTime, but it was a little unreliable and harder to share things. So we use Zoom. Zoom has a great whiteboard tool with it, which we can use We have an online, most of our material is both in paper form and online. So we can make sure that students have different accessibility options for that. So, they have everything. We also have a really cool portal. So we have what's called the No Anxiety Prep Knowledge Base, and it's a portal that our students can log into, and they have access to over 100 previously released practice tests, videos, flashcards, worksheets, timeline materials, that sort of thing. So by the fact that we have that portal, it's nice that we can kind of be in there together. But, I don't think you need a ton of bells and whistles to be able to, tutor effectively. I think the whiteboard and a clear way to write is key, of course. But if everyone has the materials and a way to collaborate, and the whiteboard on Zoom does have a collaborate option, which is nice,
Yeah.
I wouldn't reinvent the wheel, but that's just me.
Great. Nikki, you said 11 years. Let's just, go back 11 years, because one of the reasons is of this podcast is to also, get some insight about the business aspect of it, right? It's easy, as you just said about teaching, it's easy to be a subject matter expert and then be an expert in that subject. But then when it comes to teaching, it takes a whole lot of skills. But then when it comes to running it as a business, that's a whole different thing. So when it came to growing your business, when it came to sales and marketing, how did you start off, and what is the standard process that you follow now? Are you still in the mode of expansion?
Yes, we are always in the mode of expansion. We actually just signed a student in our 17th state. So we've worked with students in 17 states in the US and 7 countries. In terms of when I first started, again, I was young. Did not have a support system business wise. I was kind of figuring everything out as I went. So in terms of marketing, again, we really just did word of mouth. And that was really before things like SEO, and
Yeah.
everything was super popular. So, looking back again, would I have done things differently? Maybe. We certainly placed, inexpensive ads. Kids would come and ask, can you advertise in my yearbook? Can you advertise in my play program? Those sorts of things. But, ultimately it was word of mouth. Now we're doing more podcasts. We're doing, we've been featured on NBC a few times. We've I've written articles, I've been featured in articles. We are in magazines like Potomac Lifestyle, Chevy Chase Stroll, things like that. We, go to trade shows, that sort of thing. But, largely word of mouth. I mean, our website is obviously new, updated, SEO, shiny things. But ultimately, we believe that we shouldn't have to sell our product because it sells itself. We are good at what we do, damn good at it. And our clients want to refer us. We have 42 Google reviews, and every single one of them is 5 stars.
Great. So the primary driver for you is still word of mouth and referrals. Would you say that?
I would, and I'd like to sort of see a little bit more of that shift into advertising, but it's so, everyone says print is dead, which is why, we're sort of experimenting with some of these magazines and things of that nature. They also have an online presence, but, again, it goes back to that point that there's the market for education in some ways is so oversaturated, and it's oversaturated with unqualified people who are selling snake oil. And sometimes I think it's hard for parents to differentiate between that. They see an attractive price point, or a shiny website, and they think, oh well, this is the way to go. But I really encourage people to dig deeper. We are a company who will always have a 15-minute consult with you to answer your questions. We'll send you an info packet. Like, we will be absolutely transparent and tell you, if it's a good fit or not.
Cool. And Nikki, when you started off, it was just test prep, but then now your website reads that you just don't do test prep, right? You do a lot of things up until the students get into the university of their choice. So, and you also said you work with students from not just the US. You said 7 more countries outside of the US. So, how much of your business has now moved into non-teaching, or is it still very much the teaching is the main thing for your company, and then these things come later?
I would say teaching is still our main focus. A lot of counseling, especially as busy season starts now for college. So I would say, from May May, June through November. It's a lot of college and graduate admissions counseling. So, it's still a form of academia, just a bit of a different way to look at it. Throughout the year, we also just finished APs. So we had a lot of, kids prepping for the AP tests, which are really big in America and to an extent internationally. But I think, while we do some resume and career counseling, and then the big chunk of counseling, ultimately, we do the academics. Another area that we've branched into within the last 5 years is executive functioning. So that is tied to academics, but helping students learn to organize, break down tasks, best practices. So we try to provide not just the content-based academic, but the strategies and the paradigm for excelling in that academic arena.
Right. So let's say you've got 100 students that sign up for your teaching services. How many of them go on to also use all your other services, as in the application process and stuff like that?
I would say about 90%. Some students
Wow.
come to us
Okay.
where they've already engaged a college counselor or something of that nature. We don't poach, we don't steal. That's
Right.
unethical. It's just not what we do. We're certainly here if things change, and things have changed before, but we're confident that we work as a team, and we've worked, we're big team things. So if you have a school guidance counselor or another counselor, it's not what we would call in America a pissing contest. We're all team student. We're team Joe, we're team Sally, whatever that may be. The other cool thing I would say is, because I tried to form No Anxiety Prep as a one-stop shop, we tend to work with students from, middle, early high school through adulthood. So cool story. I'd had a student, I worked with her from age 16 to 17, helped her with test prep and admissions, got her into Georgetown. She graduated from Georgetown. She is now 29 years old. We worked together this year, and we recently just got her into Dartmouth with a $100,000 scholarship, which is pretty awesome for her MBA program. So I've
Wow.
worked with this person, on and off for 13 years, seeing her
Yeah.
from a scared little kid to she's going to go to Dartmouth. So, we really show our students that we're here for them, whatever step their educational journey is taking, and we know their story. So that's kind of the benefit, is we know your story, we know what you want, we know your goals, and that's why people keep coming back.
Great. Uh, Nikki, I'm just going to ask you about students from other countries now, because, I'm sitting here in India, and, I've spoken to a few trainers here in India who help students with SAT, ACT. And then you said you don't do just US, you do other countries as well. How did that first student from a different country start off with? And what was the immediate difference that you saw between a student from the US and the student from another country?
It started, I've had, in the DC area, very, very transnational. So I had Italian clients, and I myself am Italian. So we connected very well. And they passed my name along to some friends. When I went to Italy, I was able to actually visit them when they were there and met some of their friends. And that was really how that connection started. I, work with very highly educated parents in a lot of sense. And, their alumni networks, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, are pretty large and international. So I've gotten referrals through that. And then, of course, being here in DC, we've got a lot of diplomats, things of that nature. So that's helped as well.
Got it. The reason I asked you, I just wanted to touch upon this subject is this. So yesterday I was having a conversation with another SAT trainer, SAT, ACT test prep, right? And then he touched upon this aspect. There's one thing about students preparing for the test prep and then getting into the college, and then especially for students from other countries, and also from a different economic strata, right? The sociological adjustment, or the social adjustment that one needs to happen on campus sometimes doesn't, and then students end up leaving things halfway. So have you is this a thing? Do you offer a sort of a solution for this as well as part of your services?
Sure. I mean, I would classify that almost under a form of executive social functioning, right? And knowing, and the United States is sometimes it's almost like 50 separate little countries. If you come to America and you go to college in New York, it's going to be a very different experience than going to Texas. right? Most Americans would agree with me that those are kind of like separate countries. So you kind of have to tailor, where a student is going to be able to show them whether it's the political landscape or the what you do, what do you do for fun, or sociology, what is the campus? Is it a city campus, a suburban campus, things like that. So I think that is definitely part of the counseling process, where a student to ask. Like, I had a student a couple of years back from the UAE, and he actually ended up at Minnesota. So I'm going to guess the weather just was slightly different. So that would be something to discuss. And I would say, though, is finding those connections. So this student in particular was huge into soccer, and while not totally huge in America, it's still a growing interest. So to be able to connect his interest to soccer, I think, to what he might find at an American school would be helpful.
Great. Have you interacted with students from India, or have Indians part of your student groups?
We have quite a few Indian American clients, but we actually have not worked with anyone in India. So I'm counting on you to refer us, or hopefully some of you are listening. But we'd love to expand into India.
Great. Okay. The reason I brought this up was this, right? I was, especially after this conversation yesterday with the SAD trainer, I thought probably there could be, a collaborative effort that could happen between whatever, there's only so much that an Indian trainer can simulate for students in India, right? But then, somebody, because the students are eventually going to be traveling to the US, because and the market is only growing here in India every single day. And the it is a highly premium segment here as well. And some of the challenges that students face being in India, who are looking at a degree program in the US, are not about education. It's not about solving problems and stuff like that. It's all the other things that surround it. So that's exactly why I wanted to ask you, because especially for the students from India, I think they're going to face that gap. Indian Americans are one thing; they've grown up there, but then students who are here, who are going to move to the US. That social differences. I was just wondering if that's a thing really, because yesterday was the first time I heard about it being a big thing. I thought, it's just about being, it's just having a thick skin and then, maybe spend a year and then get past it. But I heard that, you need to be equipped with a certain language, not literally language, but then a lot of like attitude, for example. So that's the reason I brought up that question. Maybe when I'm going to go back and interact with more trainers on this podcast, I think this is going to be an important part of discussion. And if there is an opportunity for collaboration, I'm definitely going to put you in touch with people, who'd like to work. Maybe that way you could probably step into the Indian market.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Great. Nikki, that's out of the way. My next topic to talk about is, you spoke about the online infrastructure, the tools that you use, Zoom and everything. But do you still see any gaps, or are you still looking to fill gaps in that space? Are there scope for improvement when it comes to the online portal, the online infrastructure that is needed for your business?
I think there's always room for improvement. We'd love to continue expanding, the portal to include, more aspects. And I'd love to, certainly hear feedback from students or your listeners on what, would help them. I think, being able to, I guess I'm saying, if I knew what the improvements were, I'd probably make them. But, I think there's always going to be new educational tools on the horizon, right? And I think it's
Right.
important to be abreast of that. And with obviously the SAT changing in 2024,
Yeah.
I'm very interested to see sort of what tools come from that, and we'll adapt and innovate.
ACT is already online, is that right?
Not here. There was talk of it, there was a lot of talk during the pandemic about a lot of things, but none of them really materialized. So, no, as of right now, it is still a paper-based test. And I think, the SAT going digital is a mixed bag. We've certainly heard from students who have mixed feelings about it. I think, I think there's a lot of reasons the SAT is doing what they're doing. I'm not sure all of them are truly altruistic, but
Right, because the reason I brought up this topic is the mainly SAD going online, I think from 2024. And when we talk about that, we speak about, when you talk test prep it's obviously learning, but then continuous testing for the students, for them to be able to acclimatize to that entire pressure, the time and stuff like that, right? And most of them try and simulate the exact experience that a student undergoes when he or she takes an SAT or an ACT. So as of now, if it's a pen and paper sort of an exam, when it moves online, you've got to be able to simulate the online feel as well. Have you already started thinking about it? What are the steps you're taking in that direction?
So I myself have taken a test online, an official test proctored at home, due to the pandemic. So I'm certainly aware of what's going to be required of students in terms of their environment and what they're going to need to do to ensure fairness and compliance and all that. I think the big thing we're trying to do is a lot of our strategies are pen and paper based, for lack of a better word, and we're going to have to be able to find a way to translate those to an online test, and that is where revamping our course book and things are going to happen. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of materials out yet. A lot of the books on Amazon, if you look, the one was supposed to be released within the next month. That was pushed back already till the end of August. So I think people are struggling because the College Board has not really released the glut of materials that the current test has. So it's a little hard to prepare right now. I think a lot of us are trying to be ahead of the game, but with a lack of materials, it's really challenging. So the skills and the topics that the new test is testing are not terribly different from the current iteration. It's a format in terms of digital change. There's some formatting in terms of how the questions are changing, but ultimately it's not a massive content difference. So I don't think we need to do a total 180.
Yeah, definitely. It's not the content is, I don't think content is going to be the thing, right? It's just the medium of how students are going to be taking the test and how that's going to change. Because I think people outside of the US are already doing online ACTs, if I'm not wrong. Only in the US, I think it starts from 2024.
That
So
sounds
the reason I asked this also was, you're also helping foreign students, right? So the with the foreign students that are taking ACT online, for example, how are you managing the mock tests?
So, there are online available tests, right? So, we encourage students to kind of use a mix of materials. There are times where it's just easier to have a paper book. There's times where, of course, you want to utilize your material. So I think that, again, that flexibility of going between the mediums for content and then ensuring you're comfortable with the computers and stuff. The great thing about the online is most test takers are in Gen Z and are very savvy with tech. So I don't think it's as huge of a deal, but we really encourage our students to utilize breaks. Get up and do some jumping jacks. I don't care what anybody in that room thinks about you. You need to keep your blood flowing. You need to be drinking water. Like, we really do try to do the little things, the intangibles, and encourage students that you can't just sit at the computer and stare at it for 2.5 hours. It's not going to work.
Right. Um, Nikki, another thing you said, you took the test yourself a year or sometime back. Is that common practice for you and all the people in your team to keep taking tests every now and then to just get a feel of what the students go through?
Yeah, we recommend it. I think it's a smart play to, we don't want to do as I say, not as I do thing. So I think it gives, again, that credibility and relatability when we
Right.
can't, take the test. Anytime there's major changes, they are announced or, things like that. But we like to make sure that, what we're teaching is still on point.
Got it. And another thing you said, this market is oversaturated or overcrowded. Did you mean to say that the number of teachers that are available is getting more than the number of students that are taking the tests?
I don't know if I'd say that. I just think there's some really bad teachers out there, or maybe they're good at
All
what
right.
they know. I mean, the example I'll always use is the college application essay. So I can't tell you how many kids come to me and they're like, I worked on this with my English teacher. I'm like, oh, shit. You may be very good at English teaching. And I believe that, but the college essay is a different beast. It is just a very specific niche thing. So often what I'm seeing with some of these teachers is that they mean well, but they're just like not really where it should be. So that's stressful. And then, again, you see SAT prep, my neighbor's kid's hairdresser's son does SAT prep. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't go into the hair salon and tell them how to do their job, so maybe they should leave this to the professionals, right? Again, just because you can do math doesn't mean you can teach the strategies necessary to succeed on an SAT. And it's hard because in our business, you don't need a certification to practice. You don't need to pass the bar. You don't need an ND. You don't, need to have a license or a social worker, that sort of thing. So, I don't think a teacher certification is everything in the world. At all. I actually don't have a Maryland State teacher certification. I've got lots of degrees and all those sorts of things and experience. So I'm not saying you're a bad teacher if you don't have, a piece of paper next to your name. But, from what I've seen again on some of these websites and advertised on LinkedIn, it's just like, oh yeah, Sam, my neighbor does this. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that.
Got it. Because the reason I asked the saturation part, if you feel so, would you say that the overall trend, obviously, the number of students that are appearing to take SAT and ACTs is only increasing, even in the US? The general
I
trend
wish
is that.
that were true. I wish that were true. Unfortunately, the dumbing down of America continues, and colleges have largely made it, not all of them, have largely made testing optional. And I have a really, really large problem with that. And again, you're probably aware of a lot what's going on in this country. We continue to relax standards to make sure everybody gets a trophy, and I think that that is problematic. I in no way think that a standardized test should be the be all end all or the only measure of your intelligence, or that's ridiculous. It's absurd. But I fail to see how the side of that they're useless and terrible and wrong is this popular opinion. So we've seen a decrease in that. But I will say that, this year, especially with admissions, we saw a much higher rate of acceptance for high level schools with strong test scores. So, before December 15th, we already had kids into Columbia, Duke, Tulane, and Northwestern. So really, really big schools. And the thing they had in common is they all submitted high scores. So yeah.
So you're saying, despite making this rule about having the test scores not being compulsory, you're saying that the trend with the way the colleges are accepting students is uh, the students with the higher test scores. So you're saying if students need to have a real chance, they better take the test and then get better scores. Is that what you're saying?
I think I don't know if I'd say that. I think it strongly helps. I think there's certainly other factors that American schools consider that may help your admittance. Some of those factors are not controllable. So if you can't control those factors, a test score is another way to assist that. I will say that, a lot of people, again, want to jump on this, yay, no tests required bandwagon. But let's think for a minute about who that actually benefits. So, in America, college application costs range between about $30 and $80. So when schools like Harvard and Columbia and Yale, or really any school, Michigan, has taken away that gate, what do you think's happening to applications? Well, they're doubling and tripling. Who's winning when applications are doubling and tripling at $80 a pop? Now, not only are schools winning that way, rankings are often determined by acceptance rate, right? So when you accept 500 students, let's just say, and pre-pandemic you had 20,000 applications, but now you have 60,000 applications, you just cut that acceptance rate way, way down. So now you're looking good there. So, people say it's about fairness and equity. Yeah, to an extent, but grade inflation is rampant. Grades are nonsense. I have taught in the public schools here that I won't name, but it's nonsense. I mean, I just think that, the tests, the reason they're called standardized is because they're a way to compare students from New York and Texas and California and a Jewish school and a Catholic school and a this school. So, I would urge people to think about the strength of their application. And if you don't have that it factor, if you're going to blend in to the rest of the school, if you're in a high applying group, so Asian American, Indian American, white, Jewish, those are things that you're going to want to consider when you're making a decision on testing, as well as the acceptance rate of your school.
Great. We've got about a couple of minutes left, Nikki. I'd like to end this with this one question. For all the aspiring SAT, ACT trainers listening into this, especially as women trainers, if they've started off as an individual trainer and then who was looking to set it up as a solopreneur, what are the basic things that you think they need to work on?
It's just knowing your stuff back and forth. It's knowing not just how to do a question, but the deeper mechanics of a test. And I think it's important to know the population you're working with and how to adjust your teaching. I certainly wouldn't talk to a 17-year-old the same way as I would talk to a 10-year-old. And I think that, you have to keep those things in mind.
Great. Nikkee, thank you so much for taking your time out. It's been an amazing, energetic session for me. I'd totally love to have another episode sometime, when you can take an hour off, because I've got so many more follow-up questions from so much of the things that you've told. Probably after a few months, I'll reach out back to you after we publish this episode, and then see if there can be another episode. Before we end, a few words about your experience here. Was it worth your while?
Absolutely. This was a great conversation. I appreciated your insightful questions and just letting me have a platform to explain my passion. And hopefully your listeners will follow us at No Anxiety Prep on Instagram and, follow us for more tips and tricks and what's going on in the world of admissions.
It's been my pleasure as well. Thank you so much. We will also be sharing all these contact details in our notes